I would like to continue from where we stopped yesterday. We saw that the Herod who is being referred to here is Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great, one of the sons of Herod the Great. And Herod Antipas had married earlier the daughter of the king Aretas. Later, he sent her back to her father and took Herodias, that is, the wife of his half-brother Herod Philip, as his own wife, even as Herod Philip was married to her. This did not go down well, and John objected to it. Because of this objection of John, that Herod had taken his brother's wife even while his brother was alive, Herodias, that is the wife, could not accept it. And so she prompted Herod to put John in prison, even though Herod respected John as righteous and holy. The birthday of Herod is celebrated with great pomp and honor, and even though it might seem strange that Herodias' daughter would dance in front of so many outsiders and courtiers and friends of Herod, nothing really could be put past the Herodian family. Because with Herod the Great already, who had 8 wives, and so many of them marrying within the family, for example, marrying the daughter of one of the brothers. So, for example, Herodias was the daughter of Aristobulus. So, in a certain sense, she was already the niece, and that is the person whom they have married. Because it's not really unimaginable that this daughter, actually Herodias' daughter, and then because Herod had married her, she would be Herod's stepdaughter. The daughter was named Salome, and she was married to another of Herod's half-brothers, who was also named Philip. Here, Mark speaks also of Herodias as the daughter, but he possibly means the daughter of Herodias or Herod's stepdaughter. And Herod is so inspired by this dance, taken up by this dance, that he makes a rash promise. The girl, when she hears what Herod is willing to offer her, goes to her mother. And this whole story is told in a very beautiful manner by Mark. So in a certain sense, the girl could have requested something that she wanted. However, because the mother is at the root of the plot in the Gospel of Mark, Mark has the girl who danced and who was made the promise go to her mother, and the mother it is who prompts her to ask for John the Baptizer's head. The girl comes back urgently because of the manner possibly in which the mother indicated what she wanted. And she even says that she wants the head of John on the platter. Herod is upset because he really has a great regard for John. He does not think that John deserves to die. So on the one level, it might be possible to think that John the Baptizer would have pricked the conscience of Herod to some extent. Otherwise, he would not have treated him in the manner in which he did. However, here, even though Herod does not want to do what he has promised, he has to keep his oath, and then he has to do what the girl asks of him. The disciples of John, and we saw in the beginning in chapter 2, verse 18, when the disciples of John are fasting, they are the ones who come and bury John. The reason for giving you chapter 15, verses 43 to 46 in the brackets at the side is to indicate that John at least had the privilege of being buried by his own disciples. Jesus was buried by an outsider. The disciples of Jesus had all run away. In an earlier lecture, I had spoken about the total abandonment of Jesus. Even his own disciples would not be there after his death to bury him. This text completes the sandwich construction. We might remember that this is the third sandwich construction in the Gospel of Mark, where in chapter 6, verses 7 to 13, the disciples are sent on mission. In chapter 6, verses 14 to 29, John the Baptist's beheading is narrated in a very beautiful and novelistic manner by Mark. And later, that is in chapter 6, verses 30 to 33, there is a continuation of the return of mission. So the sending and the return of mission have in between the death of John the Baptist. And through this, the point which is being made is that as far as Mark is concerned, disciples who will be faithful in mission, they will have to be possibly undergo the same fate as John the Baptist. In chapter 6, verse 30, the disciples now who are apostles, why are they apostles? First, because in chapter 3, verse 14, we were told that Jesus called to him those whom he wanted, and they came to him, and he appointed 12 to be with him and to be sent out. So the being sent out is what is known as the ministry part, or being apostles. So the apostles now are the ones who gather around the Lord, and they narrate to the Lord all that they had done and taught. Notice, their mission is, first of all, continuous with the mission of Jesus. Second, it is a mission which is not only a verbal proclamation, but it is a mission which is also doing. So it is in an exorcism and healing, which is part of the done and taught, that is to repent because the kingdom of God had come. So their mission is continuous with the mission of Jesus. And so as soon as they return, the response of Jesus is not elation. Jesus is not excited and said, "Oh, how lovely, you have been so successful." Now, sometimes this is what can happen to us. What can happen to us is that when we experience some degree of success, whether it is in an examination, whether it is in a homily that we give, whether it is in a case that we are handling and we find a solution, or we have reached out to people, sometimes we might get overexcited. So the disciples here seem to be overexcited, and Jesus responds in a very, very sober manner, but in a very practical manner, because he invites them, come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while. Notice now, after you have gone out, there is the need to come in. In chapter 1, verses 35 to 39, we saw that in the verses before that, Jesus is busy, and people are coming to him from all over, and he's healing them well into the night. And that's why in chapter 1, verse 35, he himself goes away to a lonely place. So we see Jesus following his own instructions to the disciples already at the beginning of his gospel, and that going away to a lonely place by himself here, inviting them to go to a lonely place by yourself, is in order that they will be able to come to terms with what God wants. Because of the danger which is so constant, that I might get overexcited and think this success is my success, that I am so popular, that I'm doing such a great job. Because of this, there is this constant requirement to come inside. Going outside is required, but also coming inside, coming into yourself is also required. And this is what Jesus invites them to do. And they went away, we are told, in a boat. So this boat now which we saw has become the place in which Jesus teaches from. Now it becomes a place of movement so that they can escape the crowds. However, escape is impossible because the people see them coming and they move to them from all over. Now, this requirement of the people seems to me that it is because of the need that people have. However, unlike John's gospel, where in a similar miracle, that is the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus gives the discourse on the bread of life and tells them that they are seeking for him not because of anything else, but because they have eaten their fill of bread. And that prompts him to give the discourse on the bread of life. Here, Mark does not impute any motives to their seeking Jesus, but on the surface level, it seems that they are seeking Jesus possibly because he was a very, very eloquent speaker. They were taken up by what he was saying, and also because he really could heal them. He could reach out and heal them. And so, as soon as Jesus comes ashore, he realizes that there is a large crowd. And when he sees the crowd, notice the plans were that they go by themselves and rest a while. Notice. And even though this plan is made, even though they take the required step and they move in a boat, even though they do all that is required of them to find that solitude, they cannot. Now, you might remember that in the mission discourse, one of the points which I made, and I would like to believe that it is the strongest point which I would like you to keep in mind, namely, to be detached from the outcome of mission. And one way in which one can be detached from the outcome is to have a number of choices as your outcome. It doesn't mean that you do not do all that is required of you. It doesn't mean that you leave any stone unturned. It means that you do everything required. And then to avoid disappointment for your own self, you have choice 1, choice 2, choice 3. Management experts today speak about plan A, plan B, plan C. I would say not only plan A, plan B, that's at the planning stage. I would say what is also important is result A, result B, result C. It doesn't mean that you will work for result C because you want result C. No, you work for result A if you believe that result A is the best. However, if for some reason you do not achieve result A, but you achieve result C because you had already set in your mind that result C would also be fine, considering that you had done all that is required, there'll be no disappointment. We notice this in Jesus. The plan is, and you might see the plan A, is to go and be by themselves, is to sort of make a retreat, is to relax, for example, maybe have some sharing, maybe have some food, maybe have some meal together, maybe have some bon hobby, maybe have some physical rest. All of these can be seen to be the requirement. And the plan doesn't work. Because as soon as they step ashore to where they want to go, to that silence, to that peace, to that quiet, they see this large crowd. And notice the response of Jesus is not agitation, it is compassion. Mark is unafraid of showing the emotions of Jesus. There are many places in which Mark shows the emotions, but which are omitted by Matthew and Luke also. Here, Mark is unafraid. So Jesus comes and he sees them and has compassion. Why does he have compassion? Because they seem lost. How does Mark explain that they seem lost? By using this phrase, sheep. without a shepherd. And by using this, which was common in the First Testament, about David as the shepherd of the people, Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, he began, in a way, the method of the shepherd to lead the sheep, to direct the sheep. He began to teach them many things. What is important is this, that because in the case of Jesus, there is no dichotomy between teaching, we must always keep this in mind, that Jesus' teaching alone would never be in words. His teaching would always be backed up by action, and this is what we can learn also from the Lord. And then the hour gets late. And very clearly, the disciples come and make a very, very reasonable request. They make a logical request. And once again, we keep in mind this. First, we remember earlier on, it is only Peter, James, and John who witnessed Jairus' daughter being raised. There also, because Jesus said the girl is not dead but sleeping, it is likely that Peter, James, and John may have understood the raising of the girl as raising her from unconsciousness or from a coma, which they had witnessed earlier on when Jesus would heal a paralytic, a man with a withered arm, Simon's mother-in-law, and so on. So while they would think and know, even Peter, James, and the others to a small extent, that Jesus had power, that there was something within him which allowed him to heal people, anyone in their right mind would know that impossible to buy bread in such a situation. Now, the disciples, when they respond to Jesus to send the people away to the villages to buy something to eat, they expect that people will go to different shops in the villages. Notice, they will go to different shops, and I'll tell you why I'm insisting on this point. And Jesus says to them, you give them something to eat. And that seems like an absurd command. It seems irrational. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical. It's not reasonable. And this is something that we, who today go so much by reason, need sometimes to keep in mind. That is, as Hamlet tells his friend Horatio in the play Hamlet, there are more things in heaven and on earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophies. There are more things in heaven and on earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophies. This is one of those things that, yes, you must apply reason. You must apply your mind. You must apply logic. All those things are true. But there comes a time that after you have applied reason and logic and reasonableness, and you still cannot explain, then you got to go beyond. The disciples now respond sarcastically. Why do I say they respond sarcastically? On the surface level, their question is this: are we to go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? What is the reason for mentioning 200 denarii? Because 200 denarii, according to them, would have been enough. Bread which was purchased with 200 denarii would have been enough to satisfy the people. Now, there are many challenges here. First, which bakery in this town would have enough bread at this short notice for 5,000 people? Which bakery? And that's why you see earlier on I said, let the people go. If they go to different shops, it is likely that they would have been able to get something in different shops. Each one has their own choice. They can go to different shops, they can go to different places and eat. But that one bakery would give you loaves enough for 5,000 is absurd. It's unthinkable. Second, where do we have 200 denarii? We have such a small account. We have hardly a few denarii. Now, where are we going to get? Let us even assume that there were 10 bakeries in this place. And each of them could supply 10 bakeries, 500, enough. Okay, but where is the 200 denarii? We don't have that money. So there are already challenges. So they put, and this is the challenge, they put objections, not only objections, but they are even sarcastic when they put these objections. And Jesus invites them to go and check. Because as far as Jesus is concerned, he knows what he is going to do. How many loaves as you? He does not get upset at their sarcasm. He does not react to their sarcasm. And this is another lesson we learn from Jesus, to avoid, whenever we can, reaction. We must respond. Let the person say, and we give the person the freedom to respond, to say what the person has to say. But my response must be a response, not a reaction. Often, we react to people and what they say. We need to take this up in our examine. How often in a day am I a reactor? How often am I a responder? What does it mean to react? In a case like this, when the disciples are sarcastic, when the disciples make these comments, Jesus could have responded angrily. I've told you this and you must do it. That would be like a command. That would be an angry, that would be a retort, that would be a reaction. Jesus responds, and that's why he says to them, how many loaves have you? In other words, what you must do is, before putting a dampener, before putting a limit, before putting a stop to what can be done, check up what you have. Go and see. And when they find out what they had, they come and say, 5 loaves and 2 fish. And Jesus gives instructions, because as far as Jesus is concerned, the 5 and 2 will be enough to feed this large crowd. The first point we notice is that there is green grass in the second feeding miracle, which is found in Mark and which Matthew also has. The people sit on the ground. Here notice there is green grass, and this word sat down is reclined. And they sat down reclining. So basically, the groups here, the translation of groups is symposia. You heard the word symposium. Symposium is actually a drinking party, basically, but translated from groups which come together for a sort of discussion. We are having a symposium today. So this is basically what symposium means, is like a drinking party. And this reclining was only done at festive occasions. So at the Passover, they sat down reclining. In Luke chapter 7, verses 36 to 50, where Jesus is invited by Simon the Pharisee to a meal, Jesus is reclining. What does it mean to be reclining? It meant to be sitting on the ground with your legs behind you and your hand, your left or right, usually the left hand, resting on another cushion. So your hand is resting on a cushion and your feet are behind you. That is why the sinner woman in the Gospel of Luke can come behind Jesus and wet his feet with her tears and wipe them with her hair. So here also, very clearly, Jesus says to them, recline. They are not just sitting down like as if cross-legged. No, they are reclining as if there is going to be now a celebration. It's a feast. That is basically what Mark wants to convey. And this sitting down in groups of 50s and hundreds, or hundreds and 50s actually, is more for order. And what does Jesus do when he takes the bread? So they sat down in the groups. Jesus takes the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. He looked up to heaven. Usually a person would look down. Jesus looks up to heaven. And because for Jesus, God was primary, because for Jesus, God's will was all important, this is why he looks up to heaven. John, of the 4 narratives, uses the verb Eucharistein. That is, Jesus gave thanks. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, in this feeding miracle, Matthew and Mark use blessed. In the second feeding miracle in Mark chapter 8, he uses thanksgiving. But here, Jesus looked up to heaven, blessed, and broke. Eulogein is the verb for blessed. So while in John, the verb is Eucharistein, that is to give thanks, many think that because there is no breaking of the bread in John, there is only the washing of the feet in John chapter 13, they regard the breaking of the bread and giving thanks as the Eucharist in John in chapter 6, where Jesus feeds the 5,000. So he celebrates the Eucharist, they believe, with the 5,000 in chapter 6 already in the Gospel of John. And that is why later there is no need to break bread, only to wash the feet, which are basically symbols which can be seen together. The washing of the feet and the breaking of the bread are 2 basic challenging symbols which can both be seen together. And so he looking up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And almost as an afterthought, the fish are not as important as the loaves. Almost as an afterthought, we are told, he divided the 2 fish among them all. And all ate. This is the confirmation that everyone ate and they were filled. In other words, they did not simply, according to Mark, take a small piece. And then a further confirmation, not only that they ate and were filled, but that the number of baskets which were gathered over, this is also in a certain sense, though not primarily the intention in Mark, John has this instruction that nothing may be lost. Gather up the remains that nothing may be lost. And the church regards the real presence of the Lord and the cleansing, you might remember, after the Eucharist has been distributed, after the body of Christ has been distributed to the people, there is the cleansing of the paten and the chalice, because nothing should be lost. The instructions of John are remembered when the priest, after everyone has partaken of the body of the Lord, the priest will cleanse the paten and cleanse the ciboria and cleanse the cup. So nothing should be lost. This is the intention. Also from the point of view of the environment, that you leave the place as it was, that you do not destroy the place. So there are many things which we can read into the taking up of the 12 baskets full. The 12 possibly seems to indicate that one disciple or one of the 12 took one of those baskets. And then Mark will tell us that those who had eaten numbered 5,000. Matthew obviously likes to keep on exaggerating. So Matthew will say 5,000 men, not counting women and children. Very briefly, a few interpretations that are given as to what may have happened in the feeding of the 5,000. Some say that Jesus was very friendly with the Essene community. The Essene community were a very, very stoic community who lived very Spartan lives. And this Essene community would live also for times in the desert, where they would go to be in the wilderness. They would store their food in holes in the ground in the desert. Jesus was friendly with this community, And so he knew where this community kept its food. And so he was standing above one of those holes, entrance to a cave-like thing where the bread was stored, and he was giving the people the bread to eat. Another interpretation is that, like Luke mentions in chapter 8, verses 1 to 3 of his gospel, that Jesus had many women disciples who provided for him out of their means. And so there were at the time of Jesus rich and pious women who knew more or less, who would find out where Jesus is going to preach and send, before he could start his preaching, already baskets of food, which then could be distributed to those who came for that sermon or who came to hear him and to be healed by him. There is another argument which many consider logical, namely that Jesus and his disciples had their own provisions for food, and they began to take out those provisions and began to distribute those which they had to the people. The people saw this selfless act, and they were moved to also be selfless themselves. Still others say that it was basically, the numbers are exaggerated. There may have been about 50 loaves and may have been about 500 people, and then okay, each one of them had only a small fragment of this thing. Basically, it's not so much to eat to fill your stomach, it's to eat in a way as a sign of my reaching out to you. So the sacramental part. What is important is, there are others, of course, who say, really, because we were not there, we cannot really say. What we can say is that Jesus wants to provide food not only for the heart and the mind, not only for the inside of a person, but also food which is physical and which goes in from out and which nourishes the person. So he is concerned about both the individual's psychological need and also the individual's spiritual need and the individual's physical need. This is basically what the interpretation is. In the Gospels of Matthew and John, like in the Gospel of Mark, immediately after the feeding of the 5,000 is this miracle of walking on the water. The miracle of walking on the water must be seen actually more as a theophany than as a miracle. What is the meaning of the term theophany? It must be seen as a revelation of God. So Jesus wants to make a revelation of God, and so this is how it must be seen. In Mark chapter 6, verse 45, once again, Mark uses a term, a word, which he uses so often in his gospel, immediately. Now here, while Mark wants to show also that it is happening immediately, the word immediately also, when looked at in the background of John, where the people are so taken up with the feeding that they want to make him king, if we look at that background, then we can understand the word immediately to mean that he wants to move away as far as possible from these external accolades and external approval, external praise. So the word immediately here can be read in that context. He made his disciples get into a boat and go on ahead to the other side. So to escape, in a way, the crowd, while he dismissed the crowd. The second time, Mark shows Jesus as praying. Only 3 times in his gospel does Mark show Jesus as praying. This is the second time. And we notice, if the first time it was after he's becoming popular, where people are clamoring to him, here the second time, it is because he has fed 5,000 and possibly people were clamoring. They wanted to continue to be with him because he's taking care of all of our needs, our spiritual needs, our psychological needs, our physical needs. Why do we need to go anywhere else? So the dismissal of the crowd is possibly with that intention in mind, and then Jesus has to go and pray. Like he tells his disciples when they come back from mission, come away by yourselves to a lonely place. Now again, he follows his own instructions after his ministering to the people. So he goes up to be by himself. And the mountain, in chapter 3 already, verse 13, we saw he goes up to the mountain, which is considered like a place where an individual is going closer to God, to commune with God. So he goes up to the mountain, Mark says very clearly, to pray. When evening came, in other words, late evening now, because Mark has already talked about the whole day, the teaching of Jesus when he stepped ashore, it is the same day. So it seems to be very late evening, and he sees his disciples straining. It is very likely that Mark wants to indicate that the strain is because the Lord is not present with them. And the terms which Mark uses are clearly indicative of the fact that Mark does not want to interpret this incident as a miracle as much as a theophany, that is, a revelation of God. And why do I say this? When Jesus sees them, he comes first. He comes to them in the morning is the translation. The Greek is, he comes to them in the fourth watch of the night. This is according to Roman time. Mark also speaks often about Roman time, and the Romans divided the day of 24 hours into two periods of 12 hours each. And each of those two periods of 12 hours each were further divided into 4 watches. And so, when Mark says it was the fourth watch of the night, he means the last watch. Because the day began at 6. So 6 in the morning to 6 in the evening was the day, you might say. And then 6 in the evening began the 4 watches of the night. From 6 to 9, 9 to 12, 12 to 3, and the 4th watch, 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. That was a time when a person was at the weakest. When a person was straining, the person did not have strength, the person was sleepy, was fatigued. That is what Mark wants to indicate. This is when the Lord comes. When we are at our weakest, the Lord comes. But we should be aware. And even though Mark says he intended to pass by them, the intending to pass by them, the Greek paraltein autos, is in a moment of self-revelation. Unfortunately, there are some who think that Jesus wanted to pass them by, but that is not true. He wants to pass them by in a moment of self-revelation. So what people think that the disciples were mistaken. Yes, and I agree that they were mistaken. Some think that Jesus wanted to test the disciples by interpreting this. He wanted to say, let us see how they react. I don't believe that is the case. For me, the interpretation is that God, like Jesus, passes by Elijah, passes by Moses, and this passing by is in a moment of self-revelation. In 1 Kings 19, God tells Elijah, go and stand at the entrance of the cave, and the Lord is going to pass. So the revelation which the Lord is going to make. This is basically what happens. And when they look at the Lord, they are stunned and they cannot believe. But when they saw him, they thought it was a ghost. Basically, it is understandable that they think it is a ghost, because in the Old Testament, only God can walk on the waters. Human beings cannot walk on water. So first of all, by telling us that Jesus is walking on water, Mark is already indicating that Jesus is God. When he tells us that Jesus means to pass them by, once again he's indicating that Jesus is passing them by in a moment of self-revelation. And third, when Jesus comes to them, he reveals himself in this manner, tharsaete, that is translated as courage or take heart. Tharsaete ego emi, I am. Me phobieste, do not be afraid. Tharsaete and phobieste are in the imperative tense. They are commands. And in between tharsaete and me phobieste is the revelation, I am ego emi. And as soon as Jesus gets into the boat, the wind stops. And notice, they are astounded because they misunderstand. They misunderstand the point. It is not a miracle. That's why they should not be astounded. The astonishment on their part is an indication that they think it is a miracle of Jesus walking on the water. No, it is a revelation of Jesus as Son of God through three ways. First, walking on the water, which only God can do. Second, meaning to pass by them in a moment of self-revelation and revealing himself to them in the divine name, ego eimi. And Mark will tell us why they misinterpreted this in the next verse when he says their hearts were hardened, which means they behaved like outsiders. Here, they behaved like outsiders, and so that is why their hearts were hardened and they could not understand.